regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
Good morning. Welcome to AM Joy. Donald Trump has now openly admitted that his firing of the FBI director, Jim Comey, right in the middle of an investigation into the Trump campaign's possible collusion with Russia, was for exactly the reason you think, to make the investigation go away. It was a stunning admission after 2 days of his team telling a completely different story to explain why their boss fired Comey on Tuesday. From Vice President Mike Pence to Sarah Huckabee Sanders to Sean Spicer to Kellyanne Conway, the message had been unanimous. The president was only following the guidance of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who we were told had initiated his own review of Comey's performance after just 14 days on the job. But that version of events was completely blown up by the president himself.
Monday, you met with the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
Right.
Did you ask for a recommendation?
What I did is I was going to fire Comey. My decision. It was not.
You had made the decision before they came in the room.
I was going to fire Comey. There's no good time to do it, by the way.
Because in your letter you said I accepted their recommendation.
Yeah, well,
so you had already made the decision.
I was going to fire regardless of recommendation.
So there was.
Trump's decision to fire Comey came just days after, according to the New York Times, Comey asked for more resources and more personnel for the Russia investigation. And hours after CNN reported that federal prosecutors sent grand jury subpoenas to business associates of Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. It seems that timing is everything when it comes to this story, because it was on January 26th that former acting Attorney General Sally Yates told White House counsel Don McGahn that Flynn was vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians. She repeated her warning the next day, hours before Trump had Comey over to the White House for dinner. It's the only dinner that Trump is believed to have had with Comey, so presumably it's the same dinner he described this way on Thursday.
I had a dinner with him. He wanted to have dinner because he wanted to stay on. We had a very nice dinner at the White House very early on. A dinner was arranged. I think he asked for the dinner. And he wanted to stay on as the FBI head. And I said, I'll consider, we'll see what happens. But we had a very nice dinner. And at that time, he told me, you are not under investigation.
Close Comey associates told the New York Times and NBC News a very different version of that dinner. No, Comey did not ask for the dinner. His associates say he was invited by Trump. And he accepted only reluctantly, they say, because of concerns about undermining the appearance of impartiality in the investigation. And no, Comey's associates say there were no assurances from Comey that Trump was not under investigation. The senior FBI official said Comey tried to avoid the subject of the Russian ties investigation altogether. And no, Comey did not ask to keep his job. It was the president, they say, who was the one making requests that Comey, specifically, pledge his personal loyalty to Trump. Sean Spicer denied that claim on Friday. Now I want to bring in my panel, former FBI Special Agent Clint Watts, MSNBC contributor Malcolm Nance, MSNBC contributor Naveed Jamali, Eric Columbus, former senior counsel to the Deputy Attorney General at President Obama's Justice Department, and Democratic strategist Karine Jean-Pierre. Thank you all for being here. And Clint, I'm going to start with you here at the table on this notion that the director of the FBI would number one, ask to have dinner with the president in order to save his job. Does that ring true to you?
No. The FBI director is on a 10-year appointment. He's going to do his job. If you want to have the FBI director to a meeting, you do that in the Oval Office. This is the Trump way of doing business, which is around dinner tables. And he just hasn't understood that he's no longer running a business, he's running a country, and that's not the way to handle these things.
Would an FBI director, you make a really good point. I mean, this guy's on a 10-year deal. He doesn't have to go ask for his job. In theory, he's got his job for 10 years. Why would he have to ask for it? It's a really good point. Would an FBI director, in your view, or even anybody below him in the FBI, ever affirmatively tell someone, you are not under investigation? Trump claims that he told him that 3 times, once at dinner, twice on the phone.
I doubt this. I can't imagine that he would say this. It's always, if you got that question, and that's coercion,
right.
That's influence. If you get that question, you either don't answer it or you try to at least get out of the situation, which is, I imagine, what Director Comey was doing.
Yeah, and Eric Columbus, I want to now go to the other sort of element of this, was that this story that came from associates of Jim Comey, presumably people who know him personally, that what Trump wanted at that dinner was a show of loyalty, and this coming so close to Sally Yates, either hours or the next day after Sally Yates had warned Don McGahn, who's the White House's counsel, the White House counsel, that Michael Flynn, who was then the National Security Advisor, was subject to blackmail. Then he suddenly brings in the FBI director and asks him for loyalty. This is Donald Trump talking to Jeanine Pirro on Fox about whether or not he made that loyalty request.
I read that article. I don't think it's inappropriate. Number one,
did you ask that question?
No, I didn't. But I don't think it would be a bad question to ask. I think loyalty to the country, loyalty to the United States is important. I mean, it depends on how you define loyalty. Number one. Number two, I don't know how that got there because I didn't ask that question.
Eric Columbus, the idea, then you now have a he said, I guess, or he said, friends of he said, about whether or not Trump asked for loyalty. If, in fact, Donald Trump, who says that wouldn't be a bad question, would that be a bad question to ask of an FBI director in your view?
It would be a horrible question. I think Trump's been watching The Godfather one too many times.
And in your view, when you look at what happened here, and I want to go back just for a moment to the way that Comey was let go. Mr. Rosenstein, who wrote the memo on the same day of the firing, when you read about that and when you read that memo, how did it strike you? Did it seem to you that Mr. Rosenstein was initiating the firing of Jim Comey or responding to a request that he come up with a pretext?
Oh, definitely the latter. I don't think Rod Rosenstein had any interest in getting rid of Jim Comey. He was asked to come up with a pretext, and he came up with a pretext that would be the least damaging to the Department of Justice and to the FBI by ascribing it entirely to things that we already know about and things that no one in their right mind would think that Trump would actually want to fire Comey for.
And, Malcolm, well, actually, let me go to Naveed first on this, because you did work under the FBI. The other sort of pretext that we've been given for the firing of Jim Comey was that he was destroying morale inside the FBI. I want to ask you, and I'm going to ask Clint about this, too, but this is Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was acting in the role of White House spokesman on Thursday, talking about Comey losing the confidence of the rank and file. Take a listen.
And most importantly, the rank and file of the FBI had lost confidence in their director. I've heard from countless members of the FBI that are grateful and thankful for the president's decision.
And meanwhile, James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence, who we'd presume knows some folks in that agency, in the FBI, told Andrew Mitchell essentially the opposite on Friday. This is James Clapper.
I can attest. It's always difficult when you're assessing the morale of a large, complex institution. But from my vantage, and I think I'm pretty good at assessing command climate, as we'd say in the military, the morale in the FBI was very high, and I can attest personally, because I witnessed it, the very high esteem and respect that people in the FBI still have for Jim Comey.
Naveed, who's more credible on this, the spokeswoman for the president or James Clapper?
Undoubtedly James Clapper. I mean, when it comes to morale, the biggest thing you want is stability, and that has been removed in the way that they just chucked Jim Comey out the door here. And furthermore, to sort of append that with, leaked sources of who the next replacement might be, I think what the FBI needs is a chance to breathe, a chance for stability, and frankly, some more funding. I mean, look, the counterintelligence folks, they've suffered a pretty big setback here, and I think that when you start mucking around with a large organization and changing leaders in mid-stride, it causes chaos.
Yeah, and Clint, just your read, was there low morale at the FBI because of Jim Comey?
No, the only morale killer for the FBI are the politicians and partisans on each end of Pennsylvania Avenue surrounding them.
Yeah.
If they're allowed to do their job, things are going to come out just fine.
Yeah.
And they're getting battered back and forth by Republicans and Democrats, depending on what administration is in and who's running the Hill.
Yeah, too much politics invading the FBI. Malcolm, I want to ask you about James Clapper himself, because you also have had this attempt by the president to either use Jim Clapper as sort of a character witness for Donald Trump, or to basically undermine him. This is what Donald Trump tweeted on Friday about Clapper. He said, when James Clapper himself and virtually everyone else with knowledge of the witch hunt says there's no collusion, where does it end? When does it end? But this is James Clapper, again with Andrew Mitchell, saying the opposite of what Trump has said.
It's not surprising or out of or abnormal that I would not have known about the investigation, or even more importantly, the content of that investigation. So I don't know if there was collusion or not. I don't know if there is evidence of collusion or not, nor should I have in this particular context.
So Malcolm, not only Trump, but you've also had people like Senator Lindsey Graham attempt to imply that if the Director of National Intelligence didn't know or wasn't aware that there was some collusion being investigated at the FBI, that there couldn't have been any collusion. Does that make sense to you?
No, it doesn't make sense, because the Director of National Intelligence is responsible for the overall care, feeding, and management of the hierarchy. But if it is something as significant as a counterintelligence, a counter-espionage investigation that is going on within the administration and carried out by the FBI, it may be in the FBI's interest, and maybe Clapper himself could have been a target, not to tell him that investigation, because they're two completely different things. He manages intelligence. And I've noticed that he tends to say, no evidence was brought to me. He, of all, knows that intelligence is not always evidence. Evidence is a legal term, and that's probably what he's saying. It hasn't gone to Justice Department. We could have done an enormous amount of collection. But one other point to this, you know, I've noticed that Donald Trump used Clapper because Donald Trump tends to carry out his campaigns against individuals the way the Russians do with their active measures. And that's to use the same Russian-style strategy of deceive, deny, make counter-accusations, and then he always throws a new one onto the end, to dare people to challenge the authenticity or the credibility of what he says.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about the politics of this, because the sort of scandal of it on the legal side, Karine, is bad enough. But the politics of this are that we now have a president of the United States who essentially threatened the former director of the FBI via a tweet. We have him being contradicted directly by the former director of national intelligence. We have him being contradicted by sources close to Jim Comey about the dinner. Why has this not moved the politics, in your view, on Capitol Hill, as far as the Republicans are concerned?
That's a really good question. I do not understand. This should be a bipartisan outcry, because as we know for a fact that Russia interfered in our elections. We know that our democracy was undermined. And instead of wanting to find out what's going on and getting to the bottom of this, the Republicans want to figure out how to get tax reform for the wealthy, for the millionaires and billionaires. And this is, this is to Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. They need to get together and be leaders here, because this is not what our country is all about. And at the end of the day, there's this old saying that says if it looks like a duck, it sounds like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. So therefore, if there was an obstruction of justice, and if it did happen and it smells like it did, it sounds like it did, then it's likely there was an obstruction of justice. Look, what Donald Trump is doing is he is attacking, assaulting, undermining the bedrock of our democracy and our government, and he's leading us to a constitutional crisis.
Yep. If we are not in one already, Clint Watts, Malcolm Nance, Naveed Jamali, Eric Columbus, thank you very much. Karine will be back later in the show. And coming up, a growing number of Democrats are starting to use the I word. But is that even possible? One of Trump's chief congressional critics joins me next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.